Following our first Japan video, the question I dreaded the most was, what was the cost of your entire trip? And I'll explain why at the end of this video. Because the most important thing for you watching this is that for our second trip to Japan, I was ready. In preparation for this video, I made sure that I wrote down every single transaction. And I'm talking everything. I made a note of every train journey, every entrance fee, meal, cheeky trip to the supermarket, onsen, car rental, and hotel. Which, as you can imagine, was an absolute joy. And then I put everything into this glorious spreadsheet. This is real-life data from a real-life holiday that includes all the being a tourist stuff that you just don't think about, such as this delightful pumpkin cheesecake. If you're new here, we make travel movies from around the world, hoping you might just find your next holiday inspiration. This is Suitcase Monkey on the real cost of an actual Japan holiday. So I'm going to go through the full costs we had for transport, food, accommodation and sightseeing, then I'll total everything up at the end. But first, here's my fascinating disclaimer. So let's begin with the thing we enjoyed spending our money on most, the food. Unless specified otherwise, all of the following prices in this video are for the total for us as a couple, so just half the amounts for solo travel. Now, we were in Japan for 2 weeks and spent just over 100,000 yen on all food. That's everything from breakfast, lunch, dinner and snacks in between. This works out as 8,000 yen per day, which in hindsight is actually pretty reasonable considering everything we had. Our dinners averaged at almost 5,000 yen per night, but there was quite a bit of a range each evening. Our most expensive meal was in Ponta-cho in Kyoto. Here we ordered a bunch of courses and side dishes as it was Chiaki's birthday, so it was also one of the occasions where we added alcohol. But the next night, for some comparison, we had a filling noodle meal at only 1,500 yen altogether. I think that this price is around the bottom end of what a meal for two could be without going out of your way to find the cheapest diner in town. You'll notice that this bill here only actually has 2 items on it, and this is why sometimes dining out in Japan can be relatively cheap. For one, there is no tipping, so that's out. And second, bottomless water or hot tea is often provided for free and isn't considered as rude if that's the only thing you drink. For us, this was sometimes all we wanted. I would say that in general, we tried to save our money on breakfast and lunch so we could treat ourselves later for dinner. Here's a few things that worked for us. First, we would often search out for bakeries. These were a perfect way to start off our day and could cost anywhere from 400 yen to 1,000 for pastries and or coffee. The konbinis such as Family Mart or 7-Eleven also have a surprising range of hot and cold food on offer, and we frequently use these as takeaway. It was nice to grab an outside spot and watch the world go by. This fried chicken, priced at only 168 yen, was incredibly tasty, and when mixed with the fried potato, was perfection considering its price. Check out my 45 mind-blowing details about Japan video for more thoughts on why konbinis are destinations in themselves. For relatively cheap eats, also try a local search for conveyor belt sushi. Although it won't be high quality sushi, it's the cheapest way to get a sample at a low price. Also try searching for family restaurants such as Jonathan's or Saizaria. They are the Japanese equivalent of Denny's or the Little Chef. Affordable and just do the job. Their picture menus have pretty much everything you could think of at staggeringly low prices. Then of course there's all the street food and markets dotted around. Particularly if we did have a small breakfast, topping up on these would happily keep us going throughout the day. Next, let's look at sightseeing, which basically means the entrance fees to temples, museums and excursions. The total for both of us came up to 38,500 yen, which is probably at the top end of what you might spend. That's because we booked 3 fairly expensive activities, being the Hosogawa River Cruise, Team Lab Borderless and the Shin Hodaka Ropeway, which all combined came to 21,000 yen alone. Taking those out would have made our sightseeing activities only around 1,000 yen per day. And that's because for us, in general, the sightseeing costs were pretty sparse. Temples usually hover from 500 to 1,000 yen per person, and the rest of the time is just walking around. Just wandering the cities and towns in themselves was usually the most satisfying part of our time, so I don't think you need to budget much for sightseeing, apart from the big activities you might want to visit, as mentioned earlier. Yeah. Next was our biggest expenditure, accommodation. This is all on a per night cost with 2 adults sharing 1 room. Over a total of 12 nights with paid accommodation, we spent 165,000 yen on accommodation, or 13,800 yen per night. When looking for hotels, we never just try to get the cheapest thing we can find. Usually location, transport links and cleanliness are our must-haves, and then we look for extra features or just the vibe of a place to make a decision. Most of our hotels range between 11,000 and 14,000 yen per night. Our Tokyo hotel was pretty much just a room, but was 1 train ride from the airport and was easy to get to Tokyo Station the next morning for our train to Kyoto. We stayed in our Kyoto hotel for 5 nights, so wanted something a little bit more cozy. This was 13,500 yen per night and gave us easy access to most attractions we visited during our time here. The cheapest hotel was 5,500 yen in Takayama. It was walking distance from the station, included breakfast, and we had 0 complaints. One tip I should say is always, where possible, make sure you are booking a non-smoking room. Smoking rooms are pretty standard in Japan, and they smell worse than a big night out in the 1990s. We were actually given a smoking room here, but we asked for a room change because I could literally feel my lungs closing in on themselves. So just be aware when booking. It's also worth noting that for the best prices, you usually want to be booking 3 to 4 months before travel. I actually checked the pricing for this hotel a few weeks before departure, and it had doubled from what we had paid before. Just to also add that all of these hotels will be linked in the description, which if you click and book any hotel will support us at no extra cost to you. In terms of the Japanese hotel experience, I think if you really want to treat yourself, there are 2 ways to spend your money wisely. The first is booking one with easy access to an on-site onsen. In Gero, our hotel had a private onsen that you could book as a guest. We do love the onsen culture in Japan, but usually they're separated by gender, so this is an easy way around that. The hotel itself was 14,000 a night, and 1 hour in the private onsen was an additional 2,000 yen. They also had a public geothermal foot spa, which was lovely. Due to their connections with the Yakuza, tattoos are generally not allowed in onsens, so a private hotel onsen is an easy way to circumvent this. It also means you won't be showing your foreign willy to a bunch of Japanese men, so that works out pretty well too. As a slight side note, you might remember on our first Japan trip, we booked a hotel where the onsen was actually part of our room, with a view of Mount Fuji. On top of the room price itself, that added an extra 14,000 yen a night for the privilege, but I think for the experience, it was totally worth it. The most expensive hotel we stayed at this time round was in the Japanese Alps, at 24,000 yen per night, but this was half board. Very much cut off from society, what it lacked in transport options, it made up for with its food presentation and the best public onsen I've ever experienced. I think if you are staying in Japan, it's worth having 1 night in a hotel or ryokan that serves a traditional Japanese breakfast or dinner. Be aware with these that the food is very Japanese, with no catering to the Western palate. You will quite often have no idea what you're placing in your mouth, but that's kind of part of the fun. The mixed outside onsen was the clincher when choosing this hotel, and with the added bonus of snow, was about as picturesque as it possibly could be. Again, links for all of these are in the description.
I approve this hotel.
The next biggest category for cost was public transport. Together we spent 80,000 yen over 12 days of use. And as I mentioned at the start, this was for everything from bullet train rides to local trains, single bus rides and day passes. Contrary to popular belief, the Japan Rail Pass is not always the cheapest way to travel, and it wasn't for our specific route, so this was all pay as you go. I'll leave a link in the description for a handy website where you can input the stations you're travelling to, and it will tell you if you can save money with the JR Pass. So just looking at the big train journeys we did, we had Tokyo to Kyoto, Kyoto to Gero, we drove this next part so I'll cover that next, then Matsumoto back to Tokyo. The other 28,000 yen was made up of day trips to Nara, Odaiba, taking a local train to the next town, or just moving around within a city. Now, we spent 6 days in the Gifu prefecture, where transport isn't as frequent as in the big cities. Here we rented a car through Toyota for 3 nights, which cost 40,000 yen with insurance. This was slightly higher than usual since we were dropping the car off at a different location than pickup. We paid a further 6,500 yen for toll roads, which were around 1,000 yen each, as well as parking and petrol. Petrol was actually surprisingly cheap to what we're used to, so it turned out to be 46,500 yen for 3 days use of the rental car. Adding car costs with public transport meant we spent an eye-watering 126,000 yen together for everything that moved us. Ultimately, it was the car rental that pushed the price up so high. 2 JR passes for 2 weeks would have been just under 100,000 yen, but there are some exclusions with that pass, so it would have closed the gap a little. Ultimately, we wanted the freedom of having a car, especially when we were in the countryside and transport was infrequent at best and not available at worst. But overall, don't underestimate the cost of travelling around the country once you've landed. So what does all this mean when added together? For 15 nights as a couple, we spent 437,753 yen. Accommodation was the largest chunk at 165,000, then transport at 126,000, food at 107,000, and sightseeing at 38,000 yen. I've broken these figures down as daily averages for you also, if that makes it easier for your potential trip. Flights are the only thing that I haven't included here, which will massively vary for everyone, but from the UK, you're looking at £600 per person upwards. Now, I said at the start of this video that I dreaded answering the question of how much did our holiday cost? And that's because there are so many factors that go into a holiday's price tag. Prices vary so massively from one thing to the next, and one person's cheap is another's expensive. But I hope that by showing you everything we spent, this helps give a better idea of where your money might end up. I would definitely recommend that you check out the holiday that this video was based on, my 45 mind-blowing details in Japan video, as well as the 20 must-visit things to do in Kyoto. If you've gotten this far, please hit the like button, which really helps us, and subscribe for more travel content from around the world. Thanks for watching, Suitcase Monkey.